Hello, and welcome to our channel, Stories with Silas. We hope you enjoy watching.
The ancient Arabic text revealed what the billionaire had spent his life believing was pure heritage. 12 adopted orphans his ancestors had secretly raised as blood heirs. Layla watched his world collapse as 8 centuries of family lies unraveled before his eyes. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The silence that fell over Crescent House, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Middle Eastern fusion restaurants, was profound. Servers paused mid-stride, diners looked up from their plates, and even the oud players' fingers stilled on the strings. All attention turned to table 12, where an impeccably dressed billionaire stared at the young waitress with an expression of pure astonishment. His voice, usually commanding, came out barely above a whisper as he asked her to repeat what she had just said. The words that slipped from her lips, spoken in flawless classical Arabic, would unlock a family secret buried for 8 centuries. In that moment, everything would change. Layla Morrison had never imagined her life would lead her here. At 28, she juggled 2 jobs, crushing student loan debt from an archaeology degree she never finished, and the constant struggle to keep her head above water in a city that devoured dreams as quickly as it created them. Manhattan was unforgiving, especially to those without family money or connections. When her father passed away during her junior year at Columbia, leaving behind medical bills that could sink a ship, Layla had made the impossible choice: abandon her studies or lose everything. She chose survival. The scholarship that had covered her tuition evaporated when she withdrew, and the remaining balance became just another debt added to the mountain she carried. Her professors had called her brilliant, particularly Dr. Hassan, who specialized in medieval Islamic texts. She had a gift for languages, they said: classical Arabic, Farsi, even some Aramaic. She could read manuscripts that others struggled with for years. But gifts don't pay rent, and brilliance doesn't keep the lights on. So Layla became a waitress. Crescent House was different from the typical restaurant gig. Nestled in a converted brownstone in the Upper East Side, it catered to the elite: diplomats, celebrities, old money families and tech moguls who wanted privacy and authenticity. The owner, Rashid Al-Mansour, had spared no expense. Imported brass lanterns cast warm light across hand-painted tiles from Morocco. The menu featured dishes from across the Middle East, prepared by chefs trained in Damascus, Tehran, and Cairo. Staff wore elegant uniforms inspired by traditional dress, but modernized with tailored precision. The pay was decent, better than most places. The tips could be extraordinary, but the expectations were brutal. Every morning, Layla arrived 2 hours before her shift. She memorized menu changes, studied wine pairings, practiced the proper way to serve traditional tea. She learned which regulars preferred mint tea sweetened, which wanted their coffee bitter and strong, which guests needed absolute discretion. The work exhausted her, but there was something meditative about the rhythm of service. It reminded her of the careful, patient work of translation, each gesture deliberate, each word chosen with purpose. Her studio apartment in Astoria was a far cry from the elegance of Crescent House, barely 500 square feet, with a window that looked out at a brick wall and plumbing that groaned like a dying animal. But it was hers. She filled it with books, remnants of her former life. Medieval texts she'd bought for classes lined makeshift shelves. A framed photo of her father hung beside her bed. Some nights, after a double shift, she would pull out her old notebooks and lose herself in translations, pretending just for a moment that she was still that promising student with a future in academia. Tonight was busy, as Fridays always were. Reservations fully booked, the maitre d' had said. Several high-profile guests expected. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, a choreographed dance Layla had learned well. She had been assigned the main dining room, tables 8 through 14. Nothing unusual there. She had no idea that Table 12 would change everything. When the reservation list crossed her station, one name stood out: Sheikh William Rahman. The name meant nothing to her then. She would learn soon enough that William Rahman was not actually a sheikh in the traditional sense, but the heir to a vast fortune built by his great-grandfather, who had emigrated from Syria in the 1920s. The family had Americanized over generations, but William, despite his first name, had reconnected with his heritage in recent years. Forbes estimated his net worth at $4 billion, built on real estate, technology investments, and a passion for preserving Middle Eastern culture and artifacts. He arrived precisely at 8, accompanied by 2 associates and flanked by security so discreet you'd miss them if you weren't looking. Layla approached with practiced calm, her posture perfect, her smile professional but genuine. What she didn't know was that the brief conversation they were about to have would lead to an invitation, a secret, and a discovery that would shake the foundation of everything William Rahman believed about his family's legacy. The dining room hummed with subdued elegance as Layla approached Table 12. William Rahman sat with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, his salt and pepper hair impeccably styled, his navy suit clearly custom-tailored. He was perhaps 50, with sharp features softened slightly by laugh lines around his eyes. To his right sat Marcus Chen, a younger man Layla recognized as Rahman's chief of staff from occasional mentions in business journals. To his left was Victoria Hayes, an attorney whose reputation preceded her. "Good evening," Layla said, her voice steady and warm. "Welcome to Crescent House. My name is Layla, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. May I start you with something to drink, or would you prefer to see our wine selection?" Rahman glanced up, his dark eyes assessing but not unkind. "Water for now, still not sparkling, and bring the wine list, something red to pair with lamb." "Of course, sir. We have an excellent Chateau Mouzar from Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, if you're interested in something that complements both the cuisine and the atmosphere." For the first time, Rahman's expression shifted, a flicker of interest. "You know Lebanese wine? I've studied the region," Layla said carefully, not wanting to overstep, but unable to completely suppress her knowledge. "The Bekaa Valley has been producing wine for thousands of years. Even during difficult times, the vineyards persisted." Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances, clearly surprised by a waitress who could discuss ancient wine cultivation. But Rahman leaned forward slightly, his attention now fully engaged. "You studied the region. Academically?" Layla felt her cheeks warm. This was always the awkward moment, explaining why someone with her education was serving tables. "Yes, sir. I was an archaeology student at Columbia, Middle Eastern history and languages." "Was?" She kept her smile in place, though it cost her. Life had other plans. "But I still loved the subject." Rahman nodded slowly, a shadow of understanding crossing his face. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the kitchen. Rashid, the owner, emerged carrying a decorative brass coffee pot, the type used for traditional Arabic coffee service. He was headed toward a table of Saudi diplomats, a weekly occurrence. But as he passed Table 12, he paused. "Forgive me, Mr. Rahman," Rashid said with a slight bow. "I didn't realize you were dining with us tonight. Would you care for traditional coffee after your meal? I acquired new beans from Yemen. Absolutely exceptional." Rahman smiled politely. "Perhaps. Though I've been trying to find someone who can properly read the inscription on my great-grandfather's coffee pot. It's in classical Arabic, very old script. I've had 3 different translators look at it, and all gave me different answers." Layla felt her pulse quicken. Before she could stop herself, before her waitress training could suppress her scholar's instinct, she said, "Classical Arabic isn't always straightforward. The context matters enormously. Even the calligraphy style can change meaning. The table went silent. Rahman's gaze fixed on her with laser intensity. "You read classical Arabic?" Too late to backtrack now. "Yes, sir. It was my focus at Columbia. I studied under Professor Malik Hassan. He's one of the foremost experts on medieval Islamic texts." Something shifted in Rahman's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. "Malik Hassan. I endowed a chair in his department 5 years ago." Of course he did. Men like William Rahman endowed chairs and built libraries, while people like Layla struggled to pay rent. "He's an excellent teacher," Layla said simply. Victoria, the attorney, leaned forward. "William, we should probably order. We have the contract review at 10. But Rahman waved her off, his attention still locked on Layla. "You said 3 translators gave different answers. That's because classical Arabic poetry uses layers of meaning. The same phrase can be literal and metaphorical simultaneously." "Exactly." Rahman's eyes lit up. "One translator told me it was about coffee. Another said it was a blessing for travelers. The third claimed it was romantic poetry." "It could be all 3, Layla said. "May I ask what region your great-grandfather was from?" "Damascus. He left in 1922. "Then it's likely Damascene dialect poetry from that era. They often embedded multiple meanings as a form of intellectual exercise. The coffee itself becomes a metaphor for hospitality, journey, and connection." For a long moment, Rahman simply stared at her. Then he exchanged a look with Marcus, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Miss Morrison," Rahman said slowly, using her name, though she hadn't given her last name. He'd clearly noted it from her name tag. "Would you be available tomorrow?" "Not for waitressing. I have something I'd like you to see. A manuscript. It's been in my family for 800 years, and I've never found anyone who could properly translate it." Layla's breath caught. An 800-year-old manuscript. Every instinct she'd suppressed for years suddenly screamed to life. Yes, I could do that." "Good. Marcus will give you the address before you leave tonight. Come at 2 in the afternoon. And Layla—" He paused. "This stays between us. What's in that manuscript is family business, private." She nodded, her mind already racing ahead to what secrets might be locked in 8th-century-old text. She had no idea how right he was about it being private, or how devastating those secrets would prove to be. Layla barely slept that night. After her shift ended, Marcus had handed her a card with an address on the Upper West Side and a simple instruction. 2 o'clock. Don't be late. The moment she got home, she pulled out every reference book she owned on medieval Arabic manuscripts. She reviewed paleography notes from Professor Hassan's classes, refreshing her memory on different calligraphic styles. Kufic, Naskh, Thuluth. Each era had its preferred script, and identifying the style would be crucial to accurate translation. By morning, her tiny apartment looked like a scholar's war room. Books lay open across every surface, her old notebooks filled with hastily scrawled reminders about context clues and grammatical structures that had fallen out of common use centuries ago. She made coffee strong enough to strip paint and tried to calm the electricity running through her veins. An 800-year-old manuscript, the phrase kept echoing in her mind. That would place it in the 13th century, during the height of the Abbasid Caliphate's cultural renaissance, or perhaps just after, during the period of fragmentation. The historical significance alone made her hands shake. But Rahman had said it was a family manuscript. That changed everything. Family documents from that era were rare, often destroyed during conflicts or lost to time. If it had survived 8 centuries, someone had protected it deliberately, passed it down through generations like a sacred trust. What secrets did a family guard for that long? At 1:30, Layla showered and dressed carefully. Not waitress attire, but not too formal either. Dark jeans, a simple cream blouse, a blazer that had seen better days, but still looked professional. She pulled her dark hair back in a neat bun and allowed herself one small concession to nerves. Her grandmother's silver bracelet, a good luck charm from a woman who had always believed Layla was destined for something more than survival. The address led her to a limestone townhouse that took up half a block between Central Park West and Columbus Avenue. 5 stories of old New York elegance, the kind of building that had probably been in the same family for generations. A security camera above the door tracked her approach. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened. Marcus Chen stood in the foyer, wearing casual slacks and a button-down shirt, far more relaxed than he'd been at the restaurant. "Miss Morrison, right on time. Please, come in." The interior took her breath away. Where she'd expected cold modern minimalism, the typical billionaire aesthetic, she found warmth and history. The foyer opened into a great room with soaring ceilings, but every surface spoke of careful curation. Mashrabia screens filtered light through geometric patterns. Antique rugs in deep jewel tones covered polished wood floors. Calligraphy hung on the walls, some pieces clearly centuries old. "Mr. Rahman is waiting in the library," Marcus said, leading her through the house. "I should warn you, he's been somewhat obsessed with this manuscript for years. He's tried to have it translated multiple times, but no one has given him answers that satisfy him. He's hoping you might see something others missed." "Has he told you what's in it?" Layla asked. Marcus shook his head. "He's been very private about the contents. Says it's family business, not meant for outside eyes. The fact that he's willing to show you at all is unusual." They climbed a curved staircase to the 3rd floor, then down a hallway lined with photographs. Layla caught glimpses of Rahman through the years, younger, smiling with a woman who must have been his wife, standing with dignitaries, cutting ribbons at building openings. But there were older photos, too. Sepia-toned images of men in traditional dress, women with proud bearing, children with serious eyes. Generations of Rahmans staring out from their frozen moments. The library occupied the entire eastern side of the 3rd floor. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes. A massive desk dominated one corner, but the room's center held something else. A glass case, climate-controlled and sealed, with specialized lighting that wouldn't damage fragile materials. William Rahman stood beside the case, hands clasped behind his back. He'd changed from last night's formal wear into dark slacks and a charcoal sweater. He looked different here, in his private sanctuary. Less the billionaire, more the scholar. "Layla," he said, not bothering with Miss Morrison or formality. "Thank you for coming. Can I offer you tea? Coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." He nodded, then gestured to the case. "Before I show you the manuscript, I need to understand something. Professor Hassan is one of the few people I trust in this field. You studied under him. Do you maintain his principles about translation?" Layla understood immediately what he was asking. Professor Hassan had been rigid about one thing. The translator's job was to render meaning, not impose interpretation. Let the text speak for itself. "I do," she said. "I won't tell you what I think it means. I'll tell you what it says." Something in Rahman's expression softened. Relief, perhaps, or hope. "Good. Because what I'm about to show you has been locked away for most of my life. My father refused to translate it, said some things were better left buried. But I need to know. I need to understand what my ancestors thought was important enough to preserve for 800 years. He pressed a button, and the case's lid released with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, resting on archival foam, lay a leather-bound volume, its cover cracked with age, but still intact. The leather had once been dyed deep crimson, now faded to rust. Gold leaf tracery, partially worn away, formed geometric patterns across the cover. Layla's breath caught. "May I?" she whispered. Rahman nodded. With trembling hands, she reached for the manuscript. The moment her fingers touched it, she knew. This wasn't just old. This was important. And whatever it contained had the power to destroy. Layla lifted the manuscript with the reverence it deserved, her fingers barely touching the edges. 8 centuries of history rested in her hands. The leather binding creaked softly as she carried it to Rahman's desk, where he'd already prepared a workspace. Archival gloves, a magnifying glass, specialized lighting, even a humidifier to prevent the pages from becoming too brittle. "You've done this before," she observed, pulling on the cotton gloves. "I've had 3 different translators work on it over the past 5 years, Rahman said, positioning himself beside her. "Each one was given every resource they needed, and each one gave me fragments, pieces that didn't connect. One claimed it was a family history, another said it was poetry, the third told me parts were too damaged to read, which I don't believe." Layla carefully opened the cover. The first page made her breath catch. Not because of damage, but because of what she saw. The calligraphy was exquisite. Naskh script, the flowing cursive style that became dominant in the 13th century, executed with a master's hand. But more than that, the page showed signs of being a title page, carefully illuminated with gold leaf that had somehow survived the centuries. At the top, in elegant Arabic, were words that made her heart race. "The Accounting of Our House," she translated aloud, by Hassan ibn Mahmud al-Dimashqi, written in the year of the Hegira, 637. Rahman leaned closer. "That's 1239 in the Gregorian calendar. What does accounting mean? Like finances?" "No." Layla studied the text more carefully. In classical Arabic, this word, hisab, can mean accounting in the financial sense, but in this context, given the formal phrasing, it's more likely to mean a reckoning, an explanation, a family's account of itself, of its actions and choices. A confession, perhaps, or a justification. It depends on what comes next. She turned the page with infinite care. The text began properly now, dense paragraphs in the same careful script. Layla's eyes scanned the opening lines, her mind shifting into the old rhythms of translation, the careful balance between literal meaning and contextual understanding. "I, Hassan ibn Mahmud, son of Mahmud ibn Ali, of the house that has dwelt in Damascus for 7 generations, set down these words in my 73rd year, so that those who come after might know the truth of what we have done, and why we have done it." Rahman stood perfectly still. "Keep going." Layla continued, translating slowly, making sure each word was precise. "The year I was born, my grandfather told me, was a year of plenty. The rains came in their season, the harvests were good, and Damascus prospered under the rule of just governors. But prosperity, I learned, is as fleeting as morning dew. In my 40th year, the rains failed. In my 41st year, they failed again. By the 3rd year of drought, famine stalked our streets like a wolf." The text continued, describing scenes of devastating hunger. Markets empty of grain, wells running dry, families begging in the streets. Hassan's account was spare but powerful, each detail chosen to convey the scale of suffering. "Our house," Layla read, "had always been wealthy. We owned orchards and fields, caravans and storehouses. But what use is wealth when there is nothing to buy? What good are coins when children starve?" Rahman's jaw tightened. "This is about the Great Famine. I've read about it in history books. It devastated the region for years." Layla nodded, her eyes still scanning ahead. The next section made her pause. Hassan writes that his family made a decision. They opened their storehouses, distributed what food they had, but it wasn't enough. People were dying, particularly children. Orphans wandered the streets, parents dead, extended families unable to take them in. "So they helped orphans?" Rahman asked. "That's admirable. But why would that need to be hidden?" Layla's finger traced the next lines, and suddenly she understood. Her hands began to tremble slightly. "William," she said carefully, using his first name without thinking, "Hassan writes that his family didn't just help the orphans. They took them in. 12 children in total, over the course of 3 years, but they didn't take them as servants or wards. Then how?" She looked up at him, seeing the family resemblance suddenly. The proud bearing, the dark eyes, the strong features that must have been passed down through centuries. They adopted them, gave them the family name, raised them as blood children with full inheritance rights. Hassan writes, "We made them our sons and daughters in all ways, for Allah sees not bloodlines but hearts, and these children were ours in every way that mattered." The silence in the library was absolute. Rahman's face had gone pale. "That's not possible. It's written here, in your ancestor's own hand. No, you don't understand." His voice was strained, controlled fury barely contained. "My family's bloodline is documented. We can trace our lineage directly back to Damascus, pure and unbroken. My father spent 30 years researching our genealogy. We have documents, family trees, proof of our heritage." Layla looked down at the manuscript, then back at Rahman. She saw it now, the obsession his staff had hinted at, not just with history, but with lineage, with purity. "Perhaps," she said gently, "we should keep reading." Because she had seen the next section heading, and it made everything clear. Chapter 2. The Children Who Became Our Blood. Rahman stepped back from the desk, his hand running through his hair in a gesture that betrayed his carefully maintained composure. "There must be an error, a mistranslation. The word you're rendering as adopted. Perhaps it means something else in context." Layla met his eyes steadily. "William, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but the Arabic is unambiguous. The word is tabana, to adopt, to take as one's own child. There's no other reasonable interpretation." Then Hassan was lying, or exaggerating. Medieval people wrote in metaphors, allegories. Perhaps this is symbolic, not literal. "Perhaps." Layla kept her voice calm, professional. "There's only one way to know for certain." We read the rest. For a long moment, Rahman simply stood there, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words too bitter to speak. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Continue." Layla turned to the next page, aware that every word she translated now would either confirm or deny the worldview Rahman had built his identity upon. She began to read aloud, translating as she went. "The first child we took into our house was Amina. She was 7 years old, found huddled in the doorway of the mosque, too weak to beg. Her parents had died within days of each other. She had no aunts or uncles living, no grandparents to claim her. My wife, Fatima, may Allah grant her peace, washed the child's face and saw her own daughter, taken by fever 2 years before." Rahman's expression flickered. Something in that detail had struck him. Layla continued, "Fatima said to me, 'This child is a gift from Allah, sent to fill the empty place in our home.' And so, Amina became our daughter, not in secret, not in shame, but proclaimed before witnesses. She took our name. She ate at our table. She learned to read and write, rare for girls in those days. When she came of age, we arranged an honorable marriage to a merchant's son." "1 child," Rahman muttered. "He said 12. He's building to that. Hassan is explaining his reasoning, justifying the decision." Layla scanned ahead. "Here," he writes, "some in Damascus whispered that we had violated tradition, that bloodlines should remain pure, that adopting foundlings would dilute our family's honor. But I say to those who come after, what is honor without compassion? What is tradition without humanity? The question hung in the air between them. Layla turned another page, her voice softer now. The second child was Khalil, 9 years old, found scavenging in refuse heaps. Hassan writes that the boy was clever, quick-minded. They taught him mathematics and commerce. He eventually managed the family's caravans. She continued through the list. Each child had a story. Yusuf, who had watched his parents die of plague. Zara, abandoned at the city gates when her family fled. Omar, whose fisherman father drowned. Hind, whose mother died in childbirth, leaving 5 children with no one to care for them. Hassan's family took all 5. "That's already 11, Rahman said, his voice strained. "Who was the 12th? Layla's finger traced down the page to a section that made her breath catch. The 12th was different. Hassan writes, "In the final year of the famine, when I thought we could take no more, a merchant from the east arrived in Damascus. He carried with him a boy, perhaps 10 years old, with skin darker than ours and eyes that had seen horrors no child should witness. A slave?" Rahman asked. Hassan doesn't use that word. He writes, "The merchant sought to sell the boy. I bought him, yes, but not to own him. I bought him to free him. We took him to the Qadi, the judge, and had the manumission recorded. Then we brought him home, and my eldest son, Mahmud, said to him, 'You are my brother now.'" Layla looked up. "That son, Mahmud, he would be your direct ancestor. Hassan mentions him several times. He was 20 years old when they adopted the last child. And did this Mahmud have biological children? Or did he adopt as well?" It was the right question. The critical question. Layla scanned the next several pages, translating passages quickly to herself before reading them aloud. Hassan writes that Mahmud married at 25. He had 3 children with his wife. But here's what's important. Hassan never distinguishes between his biological grandchildren and the children of his adopted children. He lists them all together, names them all as his legacy. She found a passage near the end of the chapter and translated it slowly, letting each word carry its weight. "Let it be known to all who read these words that we have built our house not on the purity of blood, but on the strength of love. We have taken strangers and made them family. We have chosen compassion over tradition, humanity over pride. If this brings shame upon us, then shame is a price worth paying. But I believe, I know, that Allah judges us not by the purity of our lineage, but by the goodness of our hearts." Layla set down the magnifying glass and looked at Rahman. His face had gone ashen. He stood frozen, staring at the manuscript as if it were a venomous snake. "This changes everything," he whispered. "Does it?" Layla asked gently. "Your family still came from Damascus. You're still descended from Hassan ibn Mahmud. The only difference is that some of your ancestors were chosen by love rather than born by blood." "The only difference?" Rahman's voice rose sharply. "My entire life, my father's life, 3 generations of research into our pure lineage, all of it built on a lie. Not a lie, a misunderstanding. Your family's true legacy isn't bloodline purity, it's something better." But Rahman wasn't listening. He was staring at the manuscript with an expression of betrayal. Rahman turned away from the desk, walking to the windows that overlooked Central Park. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that reminded Layla of a soldier bracing for battle. The afternoon light cast his shadow long across the Persian rug. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "You couldn't possibly understand what this means." Layla remained seated at the desk, giving him space. "Then help me understand." A bitter laugh escaped him. "My father spent 3 decades of his life documenting our family tree. He hired genealogists, traveled to Syria before the war, searched through records in Istanbul and Cairo. He compiled binders full of documentation proving our direct lineage from Damascus to Boston to New York. Pure Arab bloodline, he called it, untainted by mixing, unspoiled by outside influence. Why did it matter so much to him? Rahman turned, and Layla saw raw emotion in his face for the first time. Because when he came to America in 1968, people treated him like he was nothing. A foreign student with an accent, a Muslim in a country that didn't trust Muslims. He succeeded anyway, built a fortune, earned respect, but he never forgot the looks, the assumptions, the doors that closed in his face. So he held onto his heritage as an anchor, Layla said softly. More than that. He held onto it as proof of worth. He would tell me stories about our family's nobility, our unbroken line from the great Arab dynasties. He said, "William, we come from scholars and merchants, from men who built Damascus into a jewel of civilization. Never forget who you are. Never let anyone diminish your bloodline." Rahman's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat, regaining control. I grew up believing that story. I built my identity around it. When I donate to museums, when I collect manuscripts and artifacts, when I sponsor Middle Eastern studies programs, it's all about preserving a heritage I thought was mine by blood, pure, direct, unquestionable. And now I find out it was built on adoption, on taking in strangers, on... He gestured at the manuscript with barely contained frustration. On diluting the bloodline my father spent his life proving. Layla stood, moving carefully around the desk. "William, I understand loss. When my father died, and I had to leave Colombia, I felt like my entire future died with him. Everything I'd worked for, everything I was supposed to become, gone. But I learned something in the years since." "What's that?" "That sometimes what we lose isn't what we thought we had. It's what we thought we needed to be." Rahman shook his head. "Philosophy doesn't change facts. The fact is, my family isn't what I believed it was. Isn't it?" Layla moved to stand beside him at the window. "Your family is still from Damascus. Hassan ibn Mahmud was still your ancestor. The only thing that's changed is your understanding of what made your family great. It wasn't blood purity, it was moral courage." "Moral courage." Rahman spoke the words like they tasted sour. "Yes. Think about it. In a time of crisis, when tradition and social pressure said to protect only your own bloodline, Hassan's family chose differently. They saw children dying and said, 'These are our children now.' That took extraordinary courage, or extraordinary foolishness. Is that what you really believe?" The question hung between them. Rahman stared out at the park, watching joggers and families, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing, oblivious to the revelation unfolding in this room. "I don't know what I believe anymore," he admitted quietly. "My whole life, I've been the keeper of a legacy, the proud descendant of an ancient line. I've given speeches about cultural preservation, written articles about the importance of knowing your roots, and now I find out my roots are complicated." "Human," Layla corrected. "Your roots are human." Hassan and his family weren't mythical figures from a distant past. They were real people facing real suffering, making hard choices. They chose compassion. That's not a weakness in your heritage, William. It's the strongest part of it. Rahman finally looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the internal war playing out behind his eyes. Anger, grief, confusion, and something else. Perhaps the first small seed of understanding. "There's more to the manuscript," he said. "Isn't there?" "Yes. Several more chapters." "Does it get worse?" Layla thought about what she'd glimpsed in her quick scan of the remaining pages. Stories of the adopted children's lives, their marriages, their own children. Hassan's final reflections written in his old age, and one section in particular that would either destroy Rahman's remaining illusions or help him see the truth. "That depends," she said carefully, "on how you define worse." The manuscript continues Hassan's story. It talks about how the adopted children grew up, how they contributed to the family, how their descendants flourished. It's actually quite beautiful. But Hassan also addresses those who criticized his family's choice. He anticipated that future generations might question what they did, so he wrote them a defense, a justification, and a challenge. Rahman's jaw tightened. "Show me." Layla returned to the desk and carefully turned the pages forward, past the individual stories of the children, past records of marriages and births, until she reached a section marked with slightly different calligraphy. The hand was shakier here, the letters less precise. Hassan had been older when he wrote this, perhaps much older. "This section is titled, 'To Those Who Will Judge Us,'" Layla said. The handwriting suggests he wrote this years after the main narrative, perhaps near the end of his life. Rahman moved closer, compelled despite his resistance. "Read it." Layla adjusted the lighting and began to translate, her voice steady and clear. "I write these words in my 87th year, knowing that death will soon claim me as it claims all men. My hands shake as I hold the pen, my eyes grow dim. But my mind remains clear, and I wish to address those descendants who will one day read this account and perhaps condemn what we have done." She paused, letting Rahman absorb that opening. He stood perfectly still, listening. "You who live in some distant future I cannot imagine may judge us harshly. You may say we violated sacred traditions. You may claim we corrupted our bloodline, diminished our family's honor, betrayed the ancestors who came before us. I have heard these accusations in my own lifetime, spoken by those who valued lineage over humanity." Rahman flinched slightly at that phrase. Layla continued, "To you I ask these questions when you stand before Allah in judgment, and He asks you what you did when children starved in your streets. What will you answer? Will you say you preserved your bloodline? Will you speak of family trees and genealogies? Will you present documents proving the purity of your heritage?" The rhetorical questions hit like hammer blows. Layla could see Rahman's jaw working, his hands clenched at his sides. "Or will you say, I fed the hungry, I sheltered the orphan, I took the stranger and made them family. I chose mercy over pride." Hassan's words echoed in the quiet library. Outside, the city continued its noise and motion, but in this room, time seemed suspended. Layla read on. "I have lived long enough to see all 12 of the children we adopted grow into honorable adults. Amina, that starving girl we found at the mosque, became a teacher of young women, passing on the gift of literacy she received from us. Khalil, the boy from the refuse heaps, now manages caravans across 3 provinces and has never forgotten his origins. He feeds 20 orphans daily from his own purse." Rahman's expression shifted slightly, not softening exactly, but something in his eyes changed. "Omar became a fisherman like his father and teaches his trade to boys who have no fathers. Yusuf studied medicine and tends to the poor without payment. The 5 siblings we took in, Hind, Rashid, Mariam, Abbas, and little Salma, have remained close, a family within our family, their bonds strengthened rather than weakened by adversity." Layla's voice grew quieter, more intimate. "And the last child, the one we freed from bondage, the boy with dark skin and traumatized eyes, he became my closest friend in my old age. He sits with me now as I write these words, reading aloud from books of philosophy, making me laugh with his wit. His name is Ibrahim, and he has been more a son to me than some men born of my own blood." That struck deep. Rahman's breath hitched audibly. So I ask you, descendant of mine who reads this in some distant time, what is family? Is it shared blood, or is it shared love? Is it the accident of birth, or is it the deliberate choice to say to another human being, you belong to us, and we to you? Layla could barely read the next part through the emotion tightening her own throat. I chose the latter. We all did. And if that makes our bloodline impure by your standards, then I embrace that impurity proudly, because the alternative was to let children die while we guarded our precious heritage. And that, I tell you, would have been the true betrayal of everything our family stood for. She looked up. Rahman had turned away again, his shoulders trembling slightly. I do not ask you to approve of what we did. Layla read the final paragraph. I ask only that you understand why we did it. We were not perfect people. We made mistakes, as all humans do. But in this one thing, I believe we chose correctly. We chose life over death, love over law, humanity over heritage. If you can read these words and still condemn us, then you have learned nothing from our story. But if you read them and feel even a small measure of pride in what we accomplished, not despite our choices, but because of them, then perhaps our legacy is secure after all. Layla set down the manuscript and waited. The silence that followed Hassan's final words stretched for what felt like an eternity. Rahman stood with his back to Layla, staring out at Central Park, his reflection ghost-like in the window glass. She could see his chest rising and falling, each breath deliberate and controlled, as if he were physically holding himself together. My father knew, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He had to have known. Layla remained still, sensing that Rahman needed to work through this himself. He read Arabic. Not as well as my grandfather, but enough. He could have translated this manuscript, could have shown it to scholars. Rahman turned slowly, and Layla saw tears tracking down his face, though his expression remained rigid. Instead, he locked it away. Spent 30 years building a genealogy that ignored this truth. Why? Fear, perhaps, Layla offered gently. Or shame. Or maybe he thought he was protecting you from what? Rahman's voice cracked. From knowing that my ancestors were good people, that they saved children's lives. What kind of protection is that? He moved suddenly, pacing across the library like a caged animal. Do you know what I've built my life around? Pride. Pride in a pure lineage that never existed. I've given millions to causes focused on cultural preservation, on maintaining traditional bloodlines, on... He stopped abruptly. God, I funded a research institute dedicated to Arab genealogical purity. I gave a speech at the opening about the importance of preserving authentic heritage. You were operating on the information you had, Layla said. Was I, or was I operating on what I wanted to believe? He laughed bitterly. Hassan asks in his manuscript what I'll say when I stand before Allah. What do I say? That I spent decades promoting an idea my own ancestor explicitly rejected. Rahman sank into a leather chair beside the fireplace, his head in his hands. For a moment, he looked nothing like a billionaire, nothing like the confident man who had walked into Crescent House the night before. He looked lost. Layla gave him time, then quietly asked, Is there anything else in your family's history that your father kept private? Any other documents or stories? Rahman looked up, his expression hollow. My grandfather's journal, written in Arabic. My father translated sections for me when I was young, but never the whole thing. He said parts were too personal, too private for anyone else to read. Where is it now? Here, in this library. Rahman gestured vaguely toward the shelves. 3rd row near the bottom. Red leather binding. Layla found it easily. The journal looked similar to Hassan's manuscript, though centuries newer. She brought it to Rahman. May I? He nodded, seeming too exhausted to care. She opened the journal carefully, scanning through pages of routine entries, business dealings, weather observations, family meals. Then she found a section dated August 1955, written in a shaky hand. "Rahman," she said softly, "listen to this. Your grandfather wrote, 'My son asks me constantly about our family tree, wants to trace every branch, prove every connection. I have shown him what he wants to see, the documents, the noble names, the unbroken line, but I have not shown him Hassan's manuscript. Not yet. Perhaps not ever.'" Rahman's head snapped up. Layla continued translating. "How do I tell him that our greatest heritage is not blood purity, but moral courage? He is so proud, so desperate to prove our worth to these Americans who look down on us. If I tell him the truth, that we are descended from orphans and foundlings as much as from merchants and scholars, will it break him or strengthen him?" "He was protecting him," Rahman whispered. "My grandfather was protecting my father from the very thing I'm feeling now." "Perhaps, but listen to what he writes next." Layla's voice grew softer. "I fear I have waited too long. My son has built his identity on sand, and I lack the courage to wash it away. I tell myself I'm sparing him pain, but truly I'm sparing myself the burden of his disappointment. This is my failure, not his, and it will be my shame to carry to the grave." Rahman closed his eyes, tears streaming freely now. "There's one more entry," Layla said, "dated a week before your grandfather died. To my grandson William, if you ever read these words, 'The manuscript in the glass case holds the truth of our family.' Not the truth I have fed your father, but the real truth. Read it with courage. Read it with an open heart. And know that you are descended from people who chose love over law, compassion over custom. That is the bloodline that truly matters." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Rahman opened his eyes and looked at Layla, really looked at her, and something fundamental had shifted in his expression. The anger was still there, but beneath it something else was emerging, understanding perhaps, or acceptance. "He left me a message," Rahman said wonderingly. "Across decades he left me a message. He knew you'd find it eventually, when you were ready." "Am I ready?" Layla smiled gently. "I think you're getting there." Rahman sat in silence for a long time, his grandfather's journal resting in his lap, Hassan's manuscript still open on the desk. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the library. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed 5 times, marking the passage of hours that had felt simultaneously endless and instantaneous. Finally, he spoke. "I need to tell you something about why this matters so much." Layla settled into the chair across from him, listening. 3 years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference in Dubai about cultural identity and heritage preservation. The audience was mostly Arab Americans, people struggling with the same questions I've struggled with. How do you maintain your identity in a country that sees you as other? How do you honor your ancestors while building something new? He paused, collecting his thoughts. I gave this passionate speech about the importance of knowing your bloodline, of tracing your ancestry back to its roots. I said that our heritage was in our DNA, that we carried the greatness of our ancestors in our very blood. People loved it, standing ovation. I was quoted in newspapers, invited to write articles. I became a voice for cultural purity. His voice grew hollow. But there was a young woman who approached me afterward. She was maybe 25, tears in her eyes. She told me she was adopted. Her Arab parents had died when she was 3, and an Arab-American family had taken her in. She asked me if she could still call herself Arab, if she still belonged to the heritage, even though she didn't share the blood. Layla's heart clenched, seeing where this was going. "And do you know what I told her?" Rahman's voice cracked. I told her that adoption was beautiful, but it wasn't the same as blood. That she could honor Arab culture, participate in it, but she would always be one step removed from those of us with direct lineage. I basically told her she was less than, less Arab, less authentic, less worthy. He looked at Layla, his face ravaged with regret. I've thought about her constantly for 3 years. Her expression when I said that. It was like I'd slapped her. And now I find out that my own ancestor would have welcomed her with open arms, would have said, "You are one of us, fully and completely, no qualifications necessary." "You didn't know," Layla said softly. "That's not an excuse." "I should have known. The Quran itself says that adopting orphans is one of the highest forms of charity. The Prophet Muhammad was raised by his uncle after his parents died. Islamic tradition is filled with stories of families taking in children who weren't biologically theirs. But I ignored all of that because I was so focused on this idea of pure bloodlines." Rahman stood and walked to the manuscript, looking down at Hassan's careful script. "My father and grandfather hid this from me, yes. But I think part of me always knew something was wrong with the story I was telling myself. I just didn't want to see it." "What changed?" Layla asked. "You." He turned to her. "When you walked into Crescent House in your waitress uniform, brilliant and educated and forced into service work by circumstances beyond your control, I saw something I'd been avoiding. Worth isn't determined by status or position or bloodline. It's determined by character, by choices, by whether you choose compassion or pride when the moment demands it." He moved to stand beside her, looking down at the manuscript together. Hassan and his family had everything to lose by adopting those children. Social standing, business relationships, their precious bloodline. But they did it anyway because it was right. That's the legacy I should have been proud of all along. "So, what will you do now?" Layla asked. Rahman was quiet for a moment, then said, "First, I'm going to find that young woman from the conference. I'm going to apologize. Then I'm going to tell her story, Hassan's story, and make sure everyone who heard my speech about bloodline purity here's the truth about what my family actually stood for. That will be difficult. You'll have to admit you were wrong publicly." "Good. I should be uncomfortable." Hassan and his family were uncomfortable when they made their choice. They faced criticism, whispers, judgment. The least I can do is face the same. He looked at Layla with something approaching wonder. "You know what the strangest part is? I feel lighter, like I've been carrying this enormous weight my whole life, the weight of living up to some imaginary standard of purity. And it's finally gone. I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be decent." "Like Hassan," Layla said. "Like Hassan." Rahman smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him. He was just a man trying to do right by children who had no one, that's all. No grand philosophy, no complex theory, just simple human compassion. He turned back to the manuscript with new eyes, seeing it not as a betrayal, but as a gift. "Will you help me? Translate the rest of it properly, prepare it for publication. I want the world to know this story." Layla felt tears prick her own eyes. "I would be honored." "And Layla, after this is done, I want to talk about getting you back to Colombia, finishing your degree. You're too talented to spend your life carrying trays when you should be reading manuscripts." She opened her mouth to protest, to say it was impossible, too expensive, too late, but something in Rahman's expression stopped her. "Hassan's family gave orphans a future," he said simply. "The least I can do is give a scholar hers." 6 months later, the Metropolitan Museum of Art hosted an exhibition that drew unprecedented crowds. Family Redefined, the Damascus manuscript, featured Hassan ibn Mahmud's 800-year-old text, professionally translated, annotated, and contextualized. But it was more than just an historical artifact. It was a revelation that challenged everything people thought they knew about heritage and belonging. Layla stood in the exhibition hall, wearing professional attire rather than a waitress uniform, watching visitors lean close to read Hassan's words translated onto elegant wall panels. She'd spent 3 months working with museum curators and historians, ensuring every nuance was captured correctly. Columbia had not only readmitted her, but offered a full scholarship to complete her degree. A scholarship funded anonymously, though she knew exactly who'd established it. "It's overwhelming," said a voice beside her. Layla turned to find Rahman, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater, attempting to blend in with the crowd. It wasn't working. Several people had recognized him, though security kept them at a respectful distance. "In a good way?" she asked. "In the best way." He gestured to a group of schoolchildren listening to a museum educator explain how Hassan's family had chosen compassion over tradition. "Look at them. They're learning that family isn't about DNA. It's about choice, love, commitment. That's what children should learn." They walked slowly through the exhibition, past cases displaying the manuscript itself, protected now in climate-controlled glory, past photographs of Damascus from different eras, past modern testimonials from adopted people sharing what Hassan's story meant to them. "There's someone I want you to meet," Rahman said, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the exhibition. A young woman stood there, maybe 28 now, reading Hassan's words with tears streaming down her face. Layla recognized her immediately from Rahman's description. This was the woman from the Dubai conference. "Sarah," Rahman said gently. She turned and her eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Rahman, I didn't expect. Please call me William." He stepped forward, his expression open and vulnerable. "I owe you an apology that's 3 years overdue. What I said to you in Dubai was wrong, cruel, built on ignorance and pride. You are Arab, fully, completely, without qualification. My own ancestors would have welcomed you without hesitation." Sarah's hands trembled. "I read about the manuscript, about your family's story. When I saw the announcement, I had to come. I'm glad you did, because I want you to know something." Rahman pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I've established a foundation in Hassan's name. It provides scholarships specifically for adopted students pursuing Middle Eastern studies. You were the first person I thought of. If you're interested, there's a full ride to any graduate program you choose." Sarah's tears came harder now. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it. Say you'll help us honor Hassan's legacy by becoming exactly who you're meant to be." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Layla watched the exchange with her own tears threatening. This was what Hassan had wanted. Not monuments to bloodline purity, but actual human beings lifted up, given chances, welcomed home. Later, as the museum prepared to close, Layla and Rahman stood one last time before the manuscript's central display. The final panel featured Hassan's challenge to future generations, his words as powerful now as they'd been 8 centuries ago. "Do you ever wonder what your father would think?" Layla asked. "If he could see all this?" Rahman considered. "I think he'd be terrified at first. Everything he built his identity on, exposed as incomplete. But eventually, I think he'd be relieved. The truth is always lighter than lies, even comfortable ones." "And your grandfather?" "I think he knew this day would come. That's why he kept the manuscript, kept his journal. He was planting seeds he knew he'd never see bloom." Rahman smiled. "I'm grateful I get to see the harvest." A museum guard approached discreetly. "Sir, we're closing in 10 minutes." They nodded and began walking toward the exit. Outside, Manhattan rushed past with its usual indifference to individual human dramas. But something had changed, at least for the people who'd encountered Hassan's story. "What's next for you?" Rahman asked as they stood on the museum steps. "Finishing my degree, then maybe teaching, helping other students discover what's hidden in old manuscripts." Layla smiled. "What about you?" "I've been thinking about that young woman, Sarah, and about all the other people I've hurt with my speeches about bloodline purity. I can't undo the past, but I can shape the future differently. The foundation is just the start." He looked back at the museum, at the banner proclaiming Hassan's story to the world. "My ancestor asked what we'll say when we stand before judgment. I think I finally have an answer. Not, I preserved my bloodline, but I tried to preserve what actually mattered. Compassion, dignity, the radical idea that love makes family more than blood ever could." Layla extended her hand. "To Hassan's legacy." Rahman clasped it firmly. "To choosing humanity over heritage." And so ends the story of how an 800-year-old manuscript revealed what a billionaire needed most to learn: that his family's greatest treasure wasn't their bloodline, but their courage to redefine what family meant. Sometimes the most important discoveries aren't about where we came from, but about who we choose to become.